What if Dudley Dursley also got a Hogwarts letter? Watch him shatter his father's toxic legacy, wield magic, and become Harry Potter's fiercest protector in the wizarding world. Before we dive into the magic, smash that subscribe button, drop a like, and comment present below to mark your attendance. 1. The morning sun over number 4, Privet Drive always rose with a sort of sterile perfection. The hedges were perfectly trimmed, the sidewalks were impeccably swept, and inside, the Dursley household operated like a machine designed to grind down anything that resembled individuality. Uncle Vernon sat at the head of the dining table, his massive Nicolas head buried behind the morning edition of the Daily Mail. He was a man who took profound pride in being thoroughly, aggressively normal. Across from him sat Aunt Petunia, her unusually long neck straining as she peered through the pristine kitchen curtains, scanning the neighborhood for any sign of untidiness or, worse, gossip. Then there were the boys. Dudley Dursley sat slumped in his chair, a mountain of a 10-year-old boy whose every whim had been indulged since infancy. He was currently poking at his plate of greasy bacon, his thick brows furrowed in a rare moment of quiet restlessness. For weeks, Dudley had been feeling an odd, prickly sensation beneath his skin, like static electricity that wouldn't go away. Whenever he got angry lately, the television would flicker, or his video game console would abruptly reset. He hadn't told his father. Instinctively, he knew Vernon would hate it. And finally, Harry Potter. Harry stood by the stove, moving with the quiet, practiced agility of a boy who had spent his entire life trying to remain invisible. He was thin, his clothes were Dudley's oversized hand-me-downs, and his round glasses were held together by Scotch tape. He set the final plate of eggs on the table, his eyes darting toward the hallway as the sharp clack of the mail slot echoed through the house. "Get the mail, boy," Vernon grunted without looking up from his paper. "Yes, Uncle Vernon," Harry murmured. Harry walked into the hallway. 3 pieces of mail lay on the doormat. A postcard from Vernon's sister Marge, a utility bill, and 2 thick, heavy envelopes. Harry froze. He picked them up, his heart leaping into his throat. The envelopes were made of heavy, yellowish parchment, sealed with a crest of purple wax bearing a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake. But it was the writing in emerald green ink that made his breath catch. The first letter was addressed with terrifying precision. Mr. H. Potter. The cupboard under the stairs. For Privet Drive. Little Whinging, Surrey. No one had ever written to Harry. But as his fingers trembled over the second envelope, his eyes widened so far they ached. The second letter read, Mr. D. Dursley. The second bedroom. For Privet Drive. Little Whinging, Surrey. "What's taking so long, boy?" Vernon's booming voice echoed from the kitchen. "Checking for letter bombs?" Harry walked back into the kitchen, his mind racing. Before he could think to hide Dudley's letter, Dudley's sharp eyes caught the thick parchment. "Hey, that's mine," Dudley barked, snatching the envelope from Harry's hand. "Dad, look. Harry got a letter and I got one too," Vernon scoffed, tearing his eyes away from the newspaper. "Don't be ridiculous, Dudley, who would be writing to?" Vernon's voice died in his throat. His face instantly drained of all color, turning a sickly, mottled shade of gray. Aunt Petunia dropped the frying pan she was holding. It hit the linoleum floor with a deafening clang, scattering grease across the pristine tiles. She wasn't looking at Harry. Her horrified, trembling gaze was locked entirely on the emerald green ink in Dudley's hand. "Vernon," Petunia whispered, her voice a fragile, cracking thing. "Vernon, look at the crest." Vernon scrambled to his feet, his massive frame knocking his chair backward. He snatched the letters from Dudley's grip, his hands shaking violently. He stared at the purple wax seal, his chest heaving as if he had just run a marathon. "It's a mistake," Vernon choked out, his face rapidly turning from ash gray to a dangerous, pulsing purple. "A filthy, freakish mistake. They've infected our mail. They've targeted my boy." "Dad? What is that?" Dudley asked, standing up. For the first time in his life, Dudley felt a strange wave of anxiety that didn't stem from not getting his way. He looked at Harry, who was watching the scene with a mixture of intense curiosity and fear. "It's nothing," Vernon roared. He lunged toward the fireplace, pulling a lighter from his pocket. "It's garbage. We are burning them. Both of them. No boy of mine is going to some freak asylum for abnormal degenerates."
"No."
"Stop," Dudley yelled. The static electricity beneath Dudley's skin suddenly flared. With a loud bang, the light bulb in the center of the kitchen exploded, showering the room in tiny shards of glass. Aunt Petunia shrieked. Vernon froze, his lighter hovering inches away from the parchment. Vernon turned slowly, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He looked at Dudley, then down at his own hands. The madness of his lifelong prejudice, combined with the sheer terror of the unnatural breaking into his perfect life, blinded him. He raised a heavy, meaty hand, moving toward Dudley with a fury he usually reserved only for Harry. "You dare raise your voice to me?" Vernon snarled. "You've been infected by him. I'll beat this unnatural nonsense out of you, if it's the last thing I do." Harry flinched, preparing to dive out of the way. Dudley took a step back, completely terrified. His father had never looked at him like this. Vernon had always pampered him, praised him for his cruelty. Now that cruelty was turned inward. But the blow never landed. In emotions so swift and primal it didn't seem human, Aunt Petunia threw herself between Vernon and Dudley. She grabbed a heavy, cast-iron skillet from the counter and slammed it onto the table with a force that cracked the wood. "Touch him, Vernon, and I swear to God you will never sleep soundly in this house again," Petunia hissed. Vernon stared at his wife, his mouth agape. "Petunia, he's one of them. Your sister's crowd. The freaks." "He is my son," Petunia shrieked, the tears finally bursting from her eyes. The dam of her compliance, built over 11 years of bitter silence, shattered completely. The ghost of her sister, Lily, seemed to fill the room. For decades, Petunia had convinced herself that she hated magic, that Lily was a freak, because it was easier than facing the agonizing grief of being left behind. She had allowed Vernon to abuse Harry because she wanted to punish Lily's memory. But now, the magic had chosen Dudley, her perfect, precious boy. And in that terrifying second, Petunia realized that if she let Vernon destroy Dudley's letter, she would be letting Vernon destroy her son, just like the wizarding world had destroyed her sister. "I lost Lily to that world because I was blind and jealous," Petunia whispered, her voice deadly quiet now. "I will not let you destroy my boy, because you are a coward." The silence that followed was suffocating. Vernon looked at Petunia as if she had grown a second head. The smug, suburban businessman was gone. In his place was a small, bigoted man whose illusion of control had been utterly annihilated. "If you choose this," Vernon said, his voice trembling with a cold, venomous rage, "if you bring that freakishness into my house, you do it without my money, without my roof. You pack your bags, Petunia. Take the boy.
Take both of them.
Get out of my sight." Petunia didn't blink. She stood tall, her chin trembling but her posture unyielding. She looked down at Harry, who was still standing near the closet under the stairs, his green eyes wide with shock. For the first time in 11 years, Petunia really saw her nephew. She saw the bruises, the oversized clothes, the hollow cheeks. She saw Lily's eyes looking back at her. "Harry," Petunia said clearly, "go to your closet. Pack whatever you have. Dudley, go up to your room and pack one suitcase. Just the essentials." "Mom," Dudley whimpered. "Do it, Dudley. Now." Within 45 minutes, the hallway of number 4 was lined with 3 suitcases and Harry's meager plastic bag of belongings. Vernon stood by the window, his arms tightly crossed over his chest, refusing to look at them. He genuinely believed Petunia would crawl back within 48 hours once she realized she had no access to his bank accounts. Petunia led the boys out the front door. They piled into her small, silver sedan, the car Vernon had bought her for their anniversary. She started the engine, threw the car into reverse, and drove away from Privet Drive without looking back in the rear-view mirror. The drive into the outskirts of London was silent. Dudley stared out the window, his mind spinning. He looked at his hands, wondering what kind of monster he was. He looked over at Harry, who was squeezed into the back seat next to the luggage. Eventually, Petunia pulled into the parking lot of a dingy, neon-lit motel on the edge of the city. She paid cash for a single room with 2 double beds. That night, the reality of their situation set in. Petunia sat at the small wooden desk, counting her remaining cash, her face pale. Harry sat cross-legged on one of the beds, holding his unopened letter like a lifeline. Dudley walked over and sat on the edge of Harry's bed. The mattress dipped significantly under his weight. He looked at Harry's thin frame, then down at his own expensive sneakers. "Harry?" Dudley mumbled, keeping his voice low so his mother wouldn't hear. "Yeah, Big D?" Harry replied defensively, tensing up out of habit. Dudley swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. "The letter. It said you lived in the cupboard. Under the stairs." Harry shifted uncomfortably.
Yeah.
"You knew that." "I knew," Dudley whispered, a tear finally escaping his eye. "But I never thought about it. I had 2 rooms full of toys I didn't even care about, and you were sleeping with the spiders. And today, Dad was going to hit me. He looked at me the way he always looks at you." Dudley looked up, his face full of raw, childish horror. "Is that what it's been like for you the whole time?" Harry stared at his cousin. The bully of Surrey, the boy who had hunted him with his gang, looked completely broken. Harry's defensive walls softened, just a fraction. "Yeah," Harry said quietly. "That's what it was like." Dudley wiped his face with his sleeve and looked at Harry with an intense, newfound resolve. "I'm sorry, Harry. I was an idiot. But if we're both whatever we are, I won't let him touch you again. I won't let anyone touch you." Harry looked at Dudley's outstretched, meaty hand. Slowly, carefully, Harry reached out and shook it. It was the first brick in the foundation of their new life. The next morning, the magical world didn't wait for them to find it. A thunderous knock rattled the flimsy door of their motel room. Petunia gasped, instinctively reaching for a lamp, while Dudley and Harry scrambled out of bed. Before anyone could answer, the door swung open, and a man so massive he blocked out the morning light stepped into the room. He had a wild tangle of black hair and a beard that covered most of his face, and his eyes glinted like black beetles under his shaggy brows. "Blimey," the giant rumbled, bending nearly double to avoid hitting his head on the ceiling. "Took a bit of work to track ya down after ya left Surrey. Sorry about the door." "Who are you?" Dudley squeaked, stepping in front of Harry. The giant chuckled, a deep, booming sound that shook the floorboards. "Name's Rubius Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. But ya know all about Hogwarts, don't ya?" Petunia stood up, her face tight, but her voice surprisingly steady. "I know who you are. You're the giant boy Lily talked about. The one who got expelled." Hagrid's face softened. Petunia. Last time I saw ya, were barely up to my knee, crying on the platform. I'm sorry about Lily. She was a brilliant witch. And look at these 2. Harry, ya look just like your dad, but ya got your mum's eyes. And Dudley, blimey, you're a big lad, aren't ya?" Never expected a Dursley to get a Hogwarts letter, but magic works in mysterious ways. Hagrid guided them out of the motel and into London. He led them through the crowded city streets to a tiny, grimy-looking pub called the Leaky Cauldron. To Harry and Dudley's amazement, the muggles walking by didn't even seem to notice it. The moment they stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. It was dark and smelling of old wood and strange spices. But the real shockwave hit when the bartender recognized Hagrid's companion. Could it be?" the bartender whispered, staring at Harry's forehead. The entire pub went dead silent. Suddenly, people were scrambling from their seats, pushing past each other just to touch Harry's hand. "Welcome back, Mr. Potter." "Welcome back," an old man in a top hat cried, tears streaming down his face. A young man with a purple turban stuttered nervously as he shook Harry's hand. Dudley watched the spectacle in absolute awe, which quickly turned into a profound sense of horror. He remembered how his father had forced Harry to sleep on a dirty mattress, how they had starved him as punishment, and how Dudley himself had used Harry as a human punching bag. Here, in this strange, hidden world, adults, powerful, magical adults, were weeping just to be in Harry's presence. Harry wasn't a freak. He wasn't a burden. He was a hero. Hagrid led them to the backyard of the pub, tapped a specific brick in the wall with his pink umbrella, and watched as the brick spun and twisted away to reveal a bustling, cobblestone street filled with cauldrons, flying broomsticks, and owls. "Welcome," Hagrid said proudly, "to Diagon Alley." Their first stop was Gringotts, the Wizarding Bank, where Dudley and Petunia learned that Lily and James Potter had left Harry a small fortune in gold. Petunia looked at the mountain of gold coins with a mixture of shame and relief. Hagrid quietly assured her that Hogwarts had a special fund for Muggle-born students like Dudley to cover their supplies, but Harry immediately stepped forward. "We split it," Harry said firmly, looking at the goblin teller. "Half of whatever is in here goes into an account for Dudley and my aunt." "Harry, no, we can't take your parents' money," Petunia started, her eyes welling with tears. "You're my family," Harry said, his voice stronger than it had ever been at Privet Drive. "Dudley is my cousin. We're going together." Dudley choked back a sob, gripping Harry's shoulder. "Thanks, Harry." Later, they went to Ollivander's to buy their wands. The shop was tiny, dusty, and filled with thousands of narrow boxes. Mr. Ollivander, an old man with pale, silvery eyes, drifted out from the shadows. Yes," Ollivander whispered, looking at Harry. "I wondered when I'd be seeing you, Mr. Potter." He then turned his gaze to Dudley. "And a Dursley. Fascinating. The magical bloodline dormant for generations, suddenly waking up. Let us see." Dudley went first. After causing a vase to shatter and a shelf to collapse, he finally held a sturdy, 11-inch wand made of English oak with a dragon heartstring core. The moment his fingers wrapped around it, a warm, golden light erupted from the tip, making Dudley look powerful, solid, and capable. "A wand for a protector," Ollivander murmured, nodding approvingly. "Sturdy, loyal, and fierce when provoked." Then came Harry. It took much longer, but finally, Ollivander handed him an 11-inch holly wand with a phoenix feather core. When Harry waved it, a shower of red and gold sparks filled the air like fireworks, bathing the dusty shop in a brilliant, beautiful warmth. Ollivander's eyes widened. "Curious, very curious." "Sorry," Harry said, "but what's curious?" "I remember every wand I've ever sold, Mr. Potter," Ollivander said softly. "The phoenix whose tail feather resides in your wand gave just one other feather. It is curious indeed that you should be destined for this wand, when its brother gave you that scar." Dudley stepped closer to Harry, his massive frame casting a protective shadow over his cousin. He looked at the old wand maker with a fierce, unwavering glare. "It doesn't matter who gave him the scar," Dudley said, his voice echoing in the small shop. "No one is going to mess with him here. I've got his back." Harry looked up at Dudley, a genuine smile breaking across his face. For the first time in his life, he felt safe. September 1st arrived with a crisp, cool autumn breeze that swept through the iron rafters of King's Cross Station. The bustling terminal was packed with commuter muggles rushing to work, completely oblivious to the extraordinary event about to take place. Aunt Petunia walked between Dudley and Harry, her hands gripping the handles of their heavy brass-bound luggage carts. She kept her chin high, her posture rigid, ignoring the odd looks from passers-by who wondered why two boys were pushing carts laden with massive trunks and caged owls. They stopped between platforms 9 and 10. Petunia stared at the solid brick barrier, her eyes shining with a deep, painful nostalgia. "This is it," Petunia whispered, her voice trembling. "This is exactly where Lily and I stood. She was so excited, and I was so incredibly cruel to her." She turned to Harry, her face softening into an expression of pure, unadulterated remorse. Before Harry could say a word, Petunia did something completely unprecedented. She dropped to her knees on the dirty station floor and pulled Harry into a tight, desperate, suffocating hug. "I am so sorry, Harry," she wept softly into his shoulder, her body shaking. "I couldn't protect my sister. I let my bitterness poison everything. But you have to live, Harry. You have to be great. For Lily. Please forgive me." Harry froze in shock, the decades of isolation and resentment melting away in the warmth of her embrace. Slowly, he wrapped his arms around his aunt, burying his face in her shoulder. "I forgive you, Aunt Petunia," he murmured. "I promise I'll be careful." Petunia stood up, wiping her tears, and turned to Dudley. She gripped her son's shoulders with a fierce, unyielding intensity. "Look out for your cousin, Dudley. He is your brother now. The boys in that world can be cruel, and the adults can be manipulative. Don't let them change who you are. Protect your blood." "I will, Mom," Dudley said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I promise." With a final, encouraging nod from Petunia, the two boys lined up their carts. They looked at each other, took a deep breath, and sprinted together toward the solid brick wall. Instead of a violent crash, they burst through a veil of golden mist, emerging onto a crowded, chaotic platform bathed in steam. A massive, scarlet steam engine stood waiting beside the tracks, its iron boiler vibrating with power. The sign overhead read, "Platform 9 3/4." The platform was alive with noise. Hundreds of children laughing, parents crying, owls hooting, and cats weaving through the sea of legs. Dudley and Harry hauled their heavy trunks onto the train, finding an empty compartment near the back of the carriage. They slid the door shut, blocking out the overwhelming noise of the platform, and slumped into the plush velvet seats. As the train gave a loud, metallic lurch and began to roll forward, they watched London fade into the distance through the window. The ghosts of Privet Drive, the cruelty of Uncle Vernon, and the bitter rivalry of their childhood were officially left behind in the smog. Harry looked across the compartment at Dudley, who was turning his oak wand over in his large hands, his expression thoughtful and resolute. "We don't know what's waiting for us at that school, Dudley," Harry said quietly, the weight of his strange fame and the wandmaker's warning heavy on his mind. Dudley looked up, his blue eyes clear and completely devoid of the malice that had defined his early years. He leaned forward, setting his hand firmly on Harry's knee. "It doesn't matter what's waiting for us," Dudley said with absolute certainty. "We are Dursleys and we are Potters. We are a team now, a united front. Whatever they throw at us, Harry, we face it together." Harry nodded, a deep, unbreakable sense of peace settling into his chest. The bitter cousins of Surrey were gone. As the Hogwarts Express accelerated into the open green countryside, two brothers rode together toward their destiny. The train ride was less of a journey and more of an escape. As the scarlet engine cut through the rolling green hills of the Scottish countryside, the compartment Harry and Dudley shared became a sanctuary. They sat opposite each other, watching the world blur past, but the peace didn't last long. The door slid open, revealing a bushy-haired girl with a book in her hand and a red-headed boy looking frazzled. "Excuse me," the girl said, her tone brisk but not unkind. "Have you seen a toad? A boy named Neville has lost one." Harry shook his head.
"No, sorry."
"But we can help you look if you want." The redhead, Ron, looked at Dudley, who was leaning back in his seat, his arms crossed over his chest. Dudley looked significantly larger than the average 11-year-old, his presence taking up the better part of the bench. "You're Harry Potter," Ron blurted out, ignoring his own question. "And you?" He squinted at Dudley. "You're the cousin, right? The one who's a muggle-born wizard." Dudley stiffened, the old defensive reflex flaring. He was used to being called names, but muggle-born felt like a label he hadn't yet learned to wear. "Yeah, that's me," Dudley said, his voice level. Before more could be said, a group of 3 boys swaggered down the hallway. The leader, a pale boy with platinum blonde hair and a sneer etched onto his face, stopped at their compartment. "Draco Malfoy." "Potter," Malfoy drawled, looking at Harry with disdain. "And the Dursley oaf."
"My father told me about you."
"A muggle born in Hogwarts? The castle will be infested with filth by Christmas." Harry stood up, his hand reflexively going to his wand. But Dudley was faster. He stood, his massive frame towering over Malfoy. He didn't pull his wand. He simply used his size, a tactic he had perfected in the schoolyards of Little Whinging, but this time, it was for protection rather than intimidation. "He's not filth," Dudley said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, low rumble. And you're going to walk away before I decide to see if your face is as fragile as your ego. Malfoy blinked, genuinely taken aback. He was used to cowardly muggles or intimidated students. He wasn't used to a boy who stared him down with the absolute lack of fear that came from a lifetime of being the biggest kid in the room. Malfoy's goons, Crabbe and Goyle, shifted nervously. "You'll regret that," Malfoy hissed, turning on his heel. "Just wait until you're sorted. You'll be in the dirt with the rest of the mudbloods." As they walked away, Ron's jaw dropped. "Bloody hell. You actually stood up to Malfoy." Hermione, however, looked at Dudley with a curious, analytical glint in her eye. Aggression isn't always the solution, but standing your ground is a fundamental part of self-respect. "I'm Hermione Granger." The Great Hall was everything the books had described, and yet nothing like it. For long tables, thousands of floating candles, and a ceiling enchanted to mirror the night sky. The sheer sensory overload was enough to make Harry feel small, but feeling Dudley's shoulder against his gave him a tether. "Harry Potter," Professor McGonagall called out. The hall went silent. Harry walked up, his knees shaking. The hat dropped over his eyes. "Difficult," the voice whispered in his head. "Very difficult. Plenty of courage, not a bad mind, and a thirst to prove yourself. But where to put you?" "Not Slytherin," Harry whispered. "Not Slytherin, eh? You could be great, you know. It's all here in your head. But I see something else. A bond." The hat remained silent for a long time before bellowing, "Gryffindor." The table exploded in cheers. Harry rushed over, but he turned back immediately, watching the stool. "Dudley Dursley." The room hummed with whispers. "A Dursley? A wizard?" Dudley walked up, his steps heavy. He felt exposed. He felt the weight of his father's past, the abuse he had inflicted on Harry, and the new, fragile desire to be better. The hat slipped over his eyes. Ah, it hummed. A dark history. A bully. A heart encased in stone. And yet, the stone has cracked. "I see a desire for redemption that burns brighter than the cruelty of your past. You crave protection. You crave a brother. Put me with him," Dudley thought, his mind fixated on Harry. "I don't care where. Just don't separate us." "Loyalty," the hat mused. "A fierce, possessive, dangerous loyalty. You are not a seeker of glory like your cousin, nor a scholar like the girl. You are a shield." "Gryffindor." Dudley pulled the hat off, relief washing over him. He walked to the Gryffindor table, where Harry stood up, waiting. They shook hands, a silent, powerful gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the teachers at the high table. Dumbledore leaned forward, his spectacles glinting with a contemplative light. Life at Hogwarts was a battlefield of social and academic expectations. Harry was famous, which brought unwanted attention. Dudley was an anomaly, which brought unwanted scrutiny. "You're doing it wrong," Hermione said, tapping her quill against the parchment. They were in the library trying to finish their charms essay. "The wand movement for Wingardium Leviosa is a swish and flick, Dudley. You're stabbing at the air like you're trying to kill a bug." Dudley growled in frustration, his face turning red. "This doesn't make any sense. In math, if you add 2 plus 2, you get 4. Here, you wave your stick and hope for the best." Harry laughed, though it was soft. "That's magic, Duds. It's not about logic. It's about intent." Dudley looked at Harry, his frustration melting away. He'd spent his life thinking he was superior because he was normal, and now he felt inadequate because he was magical. "I'm sorry," Dudley sighed. I'm tired of being the one who doesn't get it." "You're not supposed to get it yet," Harry said. "We're in this together. If you fail, I fail. If I fail, you fail. That's the pact, remember?" The rumors in the castle were endless. Some students claimed Dudley was a Death Eater in disguise. Others whispered that he was a squib who had cheated his way in. But the brothers ignored them. They had each other, and they had a secret correspondence with Petunia. Her letters were their lifeline. She sent them clippings from Muggle newspapers and advice on how to navigate the social hierarchy, not through magic, but through observation. She says to keep our heads down and gather information, Dudley whispered one night in the common room, holding a letter from his mother. She says people who talk the loudest are usually the ones with the most to hide. Harry nodded, looking at the fire. She's right. Malfoy talks about his father all the time. Maybe that's what we need to watch. If the library was their safe haven, the potions dungeon was their purgatory. Severus Snape moved through the rows like an oversized bat, his black robes billowing behind him. He stopped at their cauldron, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Harry, then at Dudley. The Potter Dursley duo, Snape sneered. A celebrity and his protector. He leaned down, his voice dripping with venom. I am told your upbringing in the Muggle world was rather indulgent, Mr. Dursley. Tell me, do you think your physical bulk will assist you in brewing a draught of living death? The class snickered. Dudley felt the heat rise in his chest. He gripped his stirring rod so hard his knuckles turned white. I don't think my size matters, Professor, Dudley said, his voice steady, refusing to look down. I think my ability to follow instructions is what matters. And I'm quite good at following them. Snape's eyes flashed with anger. 5 points from Gryffindor for backtop. He moved to Harry. And you, Mr. Potter. Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Harry hesitated. Hermione had told him this, but under the pressure of Snape's hateful stare, his mind went blank. I don't know, sir. Clearly, fame isn't everything, Snape drawled. 10 points from Gryffindor. As Snape walked away, Dudley leaned over to Harry. He's trying to break us, he whispered. He's trying to make us hate each other so we fight, or to make us hate ourselves so we quit. Don't let him. Harry looked at his brother. He realized that Snape wasn't just a teacher. He was a relic of a past that hadn't let go. Harry didn't feel the crushing defeat he usually felt. He felt a cool, sharp clarity. He wants a reaction, Harry whispered back. Let's give him silence. We'll brew the potion perfectly. That'll annoy him more. And they did. By the end of the lesson, their potion was a perfect, clear liquid, while Malfoy's was a bubbling, toxic sludge. Snape looked at their work, his face a mask of disappointment, and walked away without a word. It started as a provocation. Malfoy, frustrated by their academic success and their growing popularity as a duo, cornered them in the hallway. Midnight, Malfoy sneered. The trophy room. Wizard's duel. If you don't show up, you're cowards. Harry knew it was a trap. He knew Filch would be patrolling the corridors. We're going, Dudley said. Dudley, it's a trap, Harry argued. Exactly, Dudley said, a grin spreading across his face, the first real, genuine grin he'd had since leaving Privet Drive. It's a trap for them. At midnight, they crept through the castle. They didn't move like wizards, hesitant and waving wands. They moved like boys who had spent summers sneaking out of their house in Surrey to avoid Vernon's rage. They knew how to stay silent. They knew how to hug the shadows. They reached the trophy room. No Malfoy. He's not here, Harry whispered. No, Dudley said, pointing to a flickering lantern at the end of the corridor. But Filch is. Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, yowled, her eyes fixed on them. Run, Dudley commanded. They took off, not through the hallways, but through the secret passages Harry had discovered by accident. They climbed stairs, dodged suits of armor, and sprinted until they were gasping for air. They turned a corner and skidded to a halt. They weren't in the hallway anymore. They were on the third-floor corridor. The air felt different here. Cold. Heavy. We shouldn't be here, Harry whispered. I hear something, Dudley said. From behind a locked door, a low, rumbling growl echoed. It was a sound that vibrated in their chest cavities, a sound of something massive, something dangerous. They slowly opened the door. Inside, 3 massive dog heads loomed over them, drool dripping from razor-sharp fangs. The beast was asleep, but it was massive, a 3-headed monster guarding a trapdoor in the floor. What is that? Harry breathed, paralyzed. It's guarding something, Dudley said, his eyes scanning the room. He wasn't afraid of the dog, or rather, his fear was eclipsed by a fierce, driving curiosity. Dad always said there were no monsters in the world. He was wrong. And if there are monsters, there must be a reason they're being kept here. Dudley, we need to go, Harry urged, grabbing his brother's arm. Wait, Dudley whispered, pointing to the trapdoor. Look at the floor. That isn't a dungeon floor. That's a secret passage. Whatever is under that dog, it's important enough that they're using a beast to guard it. They backed out of the room, closing the door softly. As they sprinted back toward the Gryffindor common room, the adrenaline pumping through their veins wasn't fear. It was the thrill of the hunt. Malfoy wanted to get us expelled. Dudley laughed softly as they reached the portrait of the fat lady. But he just gave us the biggest lead we've ever had. Harry looked at his brother, realizing that for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a victim. He felt like a protagonist. We need to find out what's down there, Harry said. We will, Dudley promised. We're just getting started. They entered the common room, slipping into their beds. The fire was dying, casting long shadows on the walls. They were brothers, they were warriors, and they were the most dangerous thing in Hogwarts. Two boys who had nothing to lose and everything to protect. The stage was set. The game had begun. And for the first time in their lives, the Dursley Potter Brotherhood was ready to play. The Great Hall was a masterpiece of Halloween splendor. 1,000 live bats fluttered from the walls and ceiling while giant pumpkins carved with terrifying faces served as glowing lanterns. The tables groaned under the weight of a feast that seemed to replenish itself. Yet, despite the festive atmosphere, Dudley couldn't shake a gnawing sense of unease. He scanned the Gryffindor table. "Where's Hermione?" he asked, nudging Harry with his elbow. Harry looked around, his brow furrowing. "I don't know. Parvati said she wouldn't come out of the girls' bathroom. Apparently, Ron told her she was a nightmare and had no friends." Dudley frowned, a sharp twinge of guilt twisting in his gut. A few months ago, he would have laughed at someone crying in a bathroom. He would have been the one to put them there. But now, all he felt was a profound, aching empathy. He knew what it was like to be an outcast in a world that didn't make sense. Before he could suggest they go look for her, the heavy doors of the Great Hall slammed open. Professor Quirrell came sprinting down the aisle, his turban askew, terror etched across his pale face. "Troll!" Quirrell shrieked, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Troll in the dungeons. Thought you ought to know." He promptly collapsed face first onto the floor. Panic erupted. Students screamed, scrambling over benches in a frantic bid for the doors. It took several loud, purple firecrackers from Professor Dumbledore's wand to restore order. He instructed the prefects to lead the students back to their dormitories immediately. As the Gryffindor line shuffled out of the hall, Harry grabbed Dudley's arm. "Hermione doesn't know." They didn't hesitate. Slipping out of the line, the two boys darted down a deserted side corridor, sprinting toward the girls' bathroom. As they neared it, a horrific stench hit them, a mixture of old socks and public toilets that had never been cleaned. Then they heard the heavy, dragging footsteps. A massive, hulking figure stepped into the corridor. It was 12 feet tall, its skin a dull, granite gray, its lumpy body like a boulder with a small, bald head perched on top. In its hand, it dragged a massive wooden club. It lumbered right into the girls' bathroom. A high-pitched scream pierced the air. "Hermione!" Harry yelled. They burst into the bathroom. The troll was smashing the sinks, sending porcelain and water flying everywhere. Hermione was huddled against the far wall, paralyzed with fear. Harry pulled his wand, his heart hammering in his chest. "Hey, pea-brain!" he shouted, throwing a piece of broken pipe at the troll's head to distract it. The troll blinked slowly, turning its ugly face toward Harry. It raised its club, ready to swing. Dudley didn't think. He simply reacted. He was larger than a normal 11-year-old, heavily built, and fueled by a sudden, protective rage. He didn't pull his wand. Instead, he grabbed a heavy, shattered length of iron piping from the destroyed sinks. With a raw, primal yell, Dudley charged. He swung the iron pipe with all his might, smashing it directly into the back of the troll's knee. The beast roared in pain, its leg buckling slightly. "Harry, now!" Dudley roared, barely dodging a backhanded swipe from the troll's massive fist. Harry leveled his wand, remembering the exact wrist movement Hermione had drilled into them. Wingardium Leviosa. The troll's wooden club slipped from its grasp, hovering high in the air. The beast looked up, confused, just as the club plummeted downward, cracking violently against its own skull. The troll swayed on its feet, groaning, before crashing to the wet floor with a thud that shook the entire castle. Silence descended on the ruined bathroom, broken only by the sound of rushing water. Dudley dropped his iron pipe, his chest heaving, his hands shaking. He looked at Harry, who was pale but unhurt, and then at Hermione, who was staring at them with wide, terrified eyes. Footsteps thundered down the corridor. Professor McGonagall burst into the room, followed closely by Snape and Quirrell. McGonagall's lips were a thin, white line of fury as she took in the scene. The smashed sinks, the unconscious troll, and the 3 first-year students standing in the wreckage. "What on earth were you thinking?" McGonagall demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and sheer relief. "You are exceptionally lucky you weren't killed. Why aren't you in your dormitory?" Snape's dark eyes locked onto Harry, then shifted to Dudley. "No doubt playing the hero, Potter? And dragging your brutish cousin along for the thrill?" Dudley opened his mouth to defend them, to explain that Ron had been a jerk and they were just trying to help, but before he could speak, a small voice cut through the damp air. "Please, Professor McGonagall.
They were looking for me."
Everyone turned to Hermione. She stood up, her robe soaked, but her chin held high. "I went looking for the troll," Hermione lied smoothly, not breaking eye contact with the Transfiguration professor. "I've read about them. I thought I could handle it, but I was wrong. If Harry and Dudley hadn't found me, if they hadn't fought it off, it would have killed me." Dudley stared at her, completely stunned. Hermione Granger, the girl who lived by the rules, was blatantly lying to a teacher to protect them. McGonagall looked deeply disappointed. "Miss Granger, 5 points will be taken from Gryffindor for this. I expected better from you." She then turned to the boys. "However, taking on a fully grown mountain troll is no small feat. 5 points will be awarded to Gryffindor for sheer dumb luck. Now go back to your tower." As they walked back to the Gryffindor common room in silence, Dudley's mind was racing. For years, he had operated under Vernon's twisted logic. The strong prey on the weak, and if you get in trouble, you blame someone smaller. But tonight, that worldview had been completely shattered. He had used his physical strength not to bully, but to shield someone smaller than him. And Hermione, the girl he had dismissed as a bossy know-it-all, had taken the blame for them, shielding them from expulsion. When they finally reached the portrait hole, Hermione turned to them. "Thank you," she said softly. Harry smiled. "You're welcome." Dudley stepped forward, looking down at the small girl. "I'm sorry Ron was a jerk to you," he said gruffly. "If he ever bothers you again, tell me. I'll throw him in the lake." Hermione let out a startled, breathless laugh. "I think I can handle Ron Weasley. But thank you, Dudley." From that moment on, the dynamic shifted entirely. Hermione was no longer just a classmate. She was part of their unit. The trio of Harry, Dudley, and Hermione became a tight-knit quartet, occasionally looping Ron in, but the core loyalty remained between the 3 who had faced the troll. Dudley finally understood what true strength was. It wasn't about dominating others. It was about standing between the monsters and the people you cared about. Winter arrived at Hogwarts, blanketing the castle grounds in thick, sparkling snow. For the first time in their lives, Harry and Dudley were actually looking forward to Christmas. Petunia had written to them, explaining that she couldn't afford to bring them back to London for the holidays, but she had sent them a care package. On Christmas morning, Harry and Dudley sat in the empty common room, tearing into their presents. Petunia had sent them matching hand-knitted sweaters, emerald green for Harry, deep maroon for Dudley, along with boxes of homemade fudge. It was a far cry from the extravagant, spoiled Christmases Dudley used to have, yet it felt infinitely more valuable. But the real mystery began later that night, when Harry, using an anonymous gift of an invisibility cloak, went exploring the castle and stumbled upon an abandoned classroom. The next night, Harry dragged Dudley out of bed. "You have to see it. Harry whispered urgently as they navigated the dark corridors under the silken cloak. It shows you your family. Dudley frowned, keeping his heavy footsteps as light as possible. When they reached the classroom, Dudley saw an enormous, magnificent mirror reaching to the ceiling, with a highly ornate gold frame. Harry ran to the mirror and stood in front of it, his face lighting up with a heartbreakingly desperate smile. Look, Duds. They're right there. My mum and dad. Dudley stepped up beside Harry and peered into the glass. But he didn't see Lily and James Potter. He didn't see Harry at all. Instead, Dudley saw a reflection of himself, but older. He looked to be in his 20s, his heavy frame no longer round with baby fat, but built like a brick wall, broad-shouldered, strong, and formidable. He was wearing neat, well-tailored Muggle clothing layered under an open wizard's robe. But the most striking thing wasn't his appearance. It was who stood beside him. In the mirror, Harry stood right next to Dudley, a confident, relaxed smile on his face. They were shaking hands, equals in every way. The older Dudley in the mirror didn't have the sneering, cowardly face of Vernon Dursley. He had kind, determined eyes. Behind them, Petunia was smiling warmly, her arm linked with Lily Potter, who was looking at Dudley with profound gratitude.
Vernon was nowhere to be seen.
He didn't exist in this vision of the future. Do you see them? Harry asked softly, his eyes fixed on his own reflection. Dudley stared at the man he wanted to become. A man free of his father's toxic legacy. A man who was a protector, a true brother, and a bridge between two worlds. I see us, Harry, Dudley whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I see us, and we're safe. We're okay. Harry looked away from the mirror, glancing at Dudley. He could tell by the tone of his cousin's voice that Dudley was seeing something deeply personal. Harry reached out and squeezed Dudley's arm. We are okay, Duds. We've got each other. They sat on the floor in front of the mirror for hours, two boys finding solace in the cold, dusty room, quietly promising the reflections in the glass that they would make those visions a reality. As the term resumed, the mystery of the three-headed dog and the trapdoor consumed their free time. Thanks to a slip of the tongue by Hagrid, they had a name, Nicolas Flamel. But despite Hermione's relentless searching through the library's massive tomes, they hit a dead end. It was Dudley who proposed a different approach. Wizards are obsessed with themselves, Dudley noted one evening in the common room, slamming a heavy book shut. They write about magic like it's the only thing that exists. What if Flamel isn't just a wizard? What if he's in the Muggle history books too? Hermione looked skeptical. Why would a wizard be in a Muggle history book? Because if you're famous enough, stories bleed over, Dudley argued. My mom has always been obsessed with reading anything connected to Lily. Let's write to her. They drafted a coded letter to Petunia, asking about a Nicolas Flamel and if she remembered Lily ever mentioning him during her summer breaks from Hogwarts. 4 days later, an owl dropped a heavy, brown-wrapped parcel onto Dudley's plate at breakfast. Inside was a short letter from Petunia and a worn, leather-bound notebook with the initials Ellie embossed on the cover. Dudley, Petunia's letter read, "Your aunt was a brilliant girl, but she was terrible at organizing her notes. I kept this hidden from your father for years. I couldn't bear to throw it away." Lily mentioned a Flamel once when she was studying for her chemistry exams in the Muggle world, comparing it to her potion work. She said he was the only one who figured out the ultimate chemical reaction. Use your head, boys. Don't just rely on the wand. Hermione eagerly opened Lily's old notebook. It was filled with beautiful, looping handwriting comparing Muggle chemistry to wizarding alchemy. Look, Hermione gasped, pointing to a page near the back. Nicolas Flamel is the only known maker of the Sorcerer's Stone. It's an alchemical substance that turns any metal into gold and produces the elixir of life, which makes the drinker immortal. Harry's eyes widened. That's what the three-headed dog is guarding. The Sorcerer's Stone. And someone is trying to steal it. Snape, Dudley said immediately, his dislike for the potion's master coloring his judgment. He hates you, Harry. He tried to knock you off your broom during the Quidditch match, I know he did. But why would he want it? Hermione asked. Immortality and unlimited gold, Dudley said grimly, leaning back in his chair. In the Muggle world, men have killed their own families for a lot less. Snape wants it, and he's using us as a distraction. The discovery of the notebook did more than just solve the mystery. It forged a tangible connection to the past. Petunia hadn't just sent information. She had shared a piece of Lily. The toxic silence that had shrouded Harry's mother for a decade was finally broken. They weren't just fighting for the school now. They were honoring the legacy of a family that refused to be silenced anymore. As spring arrived, the tension in the castle grew thicker. The trio kept a close eye on Snape, but they soon found themselves distracted by an entirely different problem. Rubeus Hagrid. During a visit to his wooden hut on the edge of the Forbidden Forest, the massive groundskeeper nervously revealed a large, black egg sitting in the middle of his roaring fireplace. A Norwegian ridgeback dragon. When the egg hatched, producing a snapping, fire-breathing nightmare named Norbert, it became painfully clear that Hagrid could not keep it. "He's gonna burn his own house down," Dudley pointed out bluntly as Norbert scorched Hagrid's beard. "We have to get rid of it. If the teachers find out, Hagrid goes to Azkaban." Ron, who had joined them for the visit, suggested his brother Charlie, who studied dragons in Romania. They formulated a plan. Charlie's friends would fly over the tallest tower at midnight on Saturday to smuggle Norbert out in a crate. The plan was solid, but there was a fatal flaw. Draco Malfoy had been lingering near the hut and had seen the dragon through the window. "Malfoy knows," Harry said, pacing the common room. "He's going to tell McGonagall. He'll get Hagrid fired and us expelled." "No, he won't," Dudley said, a dangerous glint in his eye. He closed his charms book and stood up. "Malfoy wants to catch us in the act. He wants the glory of exposing the famous Harry Potter. We're going to use that against him." Saturday night arrived. Harry and Hermione carried the heavy crate containing Norbert under the invisibility cloak, struggling under the weight. Dudley, however, did not go with them to the astronomy tower. Instead, Dudley positioned himself in the shadowy alcove on the second floor, a corridor he knew Malfoy had to pass through to reach Professor McGonagall's office. Right on schedule, Malfoy came creeping down the stairs, a smug, triumphant grin plastered on his pale face. As Malfoy passed the alcove, Dudley stepped out of the shadows, deliberately making his heavy footsteps echo. Malfoy jumped, his wand raised. "Who's there?" Malfoy demanded. "Just me, Malfoy," Dudley said, stepping into the moonlight. Malfoy sneered. "The Muggle-born brute. Out past curfew? Wait until McGonagall hears about this. She'll expel you along with Potter and his pet dragon." "I don't think so," Dudley said calmly. He didn't draw his wand. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, metallic object he had asked his mother to send weeks ago, a high-powered, Muggle police whistle. Before Malfoy could react, Dudley took a deep breath and blew the whistle. The shrill, piercing shriek echoed through the stone corridors like a banshee's wail. It was deafening, entirely foreign to the quiet magical castle. Malfoy clamped his hands over his ears, dropping his wand in shock. "What are you doing, you lunatic?" "Taking you down," Dudley said, a feral grin spreading across his face. Footsteps thundered from the floor below. Argus Filch, the caretaker, came charging up the stairs, his lantern swinging wildly, his face twisted in glee. "Gotcha," Filch wheezed. "Students out of bed." Dudley immediately dropped the whistle and raised his hands, adopting a look of innocent panic. "Mr. Filch, thank goodness. I was just coming back from the bathroom, and Malfoy cornered me. He was trying to curse me, and he said he was going to break into McGonagall's office." Malfoy's jaw dropped in sheer, unadulterated outrage. "That is a lie. You filthy mudblood, you." "Language, boy," Filch snarled, grabbing Malfoy by the ear. "Caught red-handed, out of bed, and bullying other students. Oh, Professor McGonagall will want to see you, all right. He has a dragon." Malfoy shrieked as Filch dragged him away. "Potter has a dragon." "Of course he does," Filch muttered sarcastically. "And I'm a bloody leprechaun. Come along, you little rat." Dudley stood in the corridor, listening to Malfoy's fading protests. He checked his watch. By now, Harry and Hermione were safely handing Norbert over to Charlie's friends. The plan had worked perfectly. Dudley walked back to the Gryffindor common room, immensely satisfied. He had just protected his family, secured Hagrid's safety, and utterly humiliated the boy who thought blood status made him superior. Vernon Dursley had taught Dudley that power was about crushing the weak. But as Dudley climbed through the portrait hole, he knew the truth. Real power was outsmarting the cruel, protecting your own, and rewriting the legacy of the Dursley name. The Forbidden Forest at midnight was a realm of suffocating shadows and ancient, whispering terrors. The air smelled of damp earth, rotting leaves, and a strange, metallic tang that made the hair on Dudley's arms stand on end. They were in detention, ironically caught out of bed after the dragon escapade, and their punishment was to help Hagrid find whatever was slaughtering the reservation's unicorns. "Look there," Hagrid whispered, holding his lantern low. On the roots of a massive, gnarled oak tree, a thick, silvery liquid gleamed under the moonlight. It looked like liquid mercury, glowing with a faint, tragic light. "Unicorn blood," Hagrid said, his booming voice reduced to a solemn murmur. "Something's been huttin' 'em bad. We need to split up. Harry, Dudley, you come with me, and Fong. Malfoy, Neville, you take the other path." Malfoy looked terrified, his pale face practically translucent in the dark, but Dudley felt a different kind of tension. He gripped his English oak wand tightly in his jacket pocket. It felt warm against his palm, a steady heartbeat of magic answering his rising adrenaline. Eventually, Hagrid sent Harry and Dudley ahead with Fong while he checked a deeper thicket. The silence of the woods closed in around the two boys. Fong whined, his tail tucked firmly between his legs. Then they found it. In a small clearing, a magnificent white unicorn lay on its side, its long, elegant legs twisted hopelessly. Its life had vanished. Hovering over the carcass was a hooded figure, draped in pitch-black robes that didn't seem to reflect the moonlight. The creature was slithering across the ground like a human snake. It lowered its hidden face to the open wound on the unicorn's neck and began to drink. Harry gasped. A blinding, agonizing pain erupted across his forehead. He clutched his scar, his knees buckling as he collapsed onto the damp moss, a muffled scream escaping his lips. The hooded figure snapped its head up. The silver blood dripped from its invisible mouth. It rose, gliding slowly, menacingly across the clearing directly toward Harry. Fong turned and bolted into the bushes, barking in sheer terror. Dudley felt a cold wave of fear wash over him, a primal instinct screaming at him to run, to save himself. It was the same cowardice his father had always hidden beneath his boisterous exterior. But Dudley looked down at Harry, who was writhing in pain on the ground, completely defenseless. "Protect your blood," his mother's voice echoed in his mind. Dudley stepped over Harry's trembling body, planting his heavy boots firmly into the earth. He drew his wand, his broad chest heaving. He didn't know many spells, certainly nothing lethal, but he had his size, his weight, and an unbreakable vow. "Get back," Dudley roared, his voice echoing through the ancient trees. "Don't you dare touch him." The cloaked figure paused, its hidden eyes locking onto Dudley. It emitted a low, hissing sound that chilled the air. It raised a skeletal hand, but before it could strike, a thunderous sound of galloping hooves filled the clearing. A centaur, with the torso of a platinum-blonde man and the body of a chestnut horse, leaped over Dudley, rearing up and kicking its front hooves at the hooded monster. The creature scrambled backward, dissolving into the shadows like smoke. The centaur, whose name was Firenze, lowered himself and looked at the two boys with deep, sorrowful eyes. "You must leave these woods, Harry Potter, Dudley Dursley. The forest is not safe tonight, especially for those who carry the weight of prophecy." As Hagrid finally caught up to them, Dudley helped Harry to his feet. Harry looked at his cousin, his green eyes filled with a profound, unspoken gratitude. Dudley just nodded, wiping the sweat from his forehead. The monster in the woods was terrifying, but Dudley had stood his ground. He was no longer the bully of Privet Drive. He was the shield. The Forbidden Forest at midnight was a realm of suffocating shadows and ancient, whispering terrors. The air smelled of damp earth, rotting leaves, and a strange, metallic tang that made the hair on Dudley's arms stand on end. They were in detention, ironically caught out of bed after the dragon escapade, and their punishment was to help Hagrid find whatever was slaughtering the reservation's unicorns. "Look there," Hagrid whispered, holding his lantern low. On the roots of a massive, gnarled oak tree, a thick, silvery liquid gleamed under the moonlight. It looked like liquid mercury, glowing with a faint, tragic light. "Unicorn blood," Hagrid said, his booming voice reduced to a solemn murmur. "Something's been hutting them bad. We need to split up. Harry, Dudley, you come with me, and Fong. Malfoy, Neville, you take the other path." Malfoy looked terrified, his pale face practically translucent in the dark, but Dudley felt a different kind of tension. He gripped his English oak wand tightly in his jacket pocket. It felt warm against his palm, a steady heartbeat of magic answering his rising adrenaline. Eventually, Hagrid sent Harry and Dudley ahead with Fong while he checked a deeper thicket. The silence of the woods closed in around the two boys. Fong whined, his tail tucked firmly between his legs. Then they found it. In a small clearing, a magnificent white unicorn lay on its side, its long, elegant legs twisted hopelessly. Its life had vanished. Hovering over the carcass was a hooded figure, draped in pitch-black robes that didn't seem to reflect the moonlight. The creature was slithering across the ground like a human snake. It lowered its hidden face to the open wound on the unicorn's neck and began to drink. Harry gasped. A blinding, agonizing pain erupted across his forehead. He clutched his scar, his knees buckling as he collapsed onto the damp moss, a muffled scream escaping his lips. The hooded figure snapped its head up. The silver blood dripped from its invisible mouth. It rose, gliding slowly, menacingly across the clearing directly toward Harry. Fong turned and bolted into the bushes, barking in sheer terror. Dudley felt a cold wave of fear wash over him, a primal instinct screaming at him to run, to save himself. It was the same cowardice his father had always hidden beneath his boisterous exterior. But Dudley looked down at Harry, who was writhing in pain on the ground, completely defenseless. "Protect your blood," his mother's voice echoed in his mind. Dudley stepped over Harry's trembling body, planting his heavy boots firmly into the earth. He drew his wand, his broad chest heaving. He didn't know many spells, certainly nothing lethal, but he had his size, his weight, and an unbreakable vow. "Get back," Dudley roared, his voice echoing through the ancient trees. "Don't you dare touch him." The cloaked figure paused, its hidden eyes locking onto Dudley. It emitted a low, hissing sound that chilled the air. It raised a skeletal hand, but before it could strike, a thunderous sound of galloping hooves filled the clearing. A centaur, with the torso of a platinum-blonde man and the body of a chestnut horse, leaped over Dudley, rearing up and kicking its front hooves at the hooded monster. The creature scrambled backward, dissolving into the shadows like smoke. The centaur, whose name was Firenze, lowered himself and looked at the two boys with deep, sorrowful eyes. "You must leave these woods, Harry Potter, Dudley Dursley. The forest is not safe tonight, especially for those who carry the weight of prophecy." As Hagrid finally caught up to them, Dudley helped Harry to his feet. Harry looked at his cousin, his green eyes filled with a profound, unspoken gratitude. Dudley just nodded, wiping the sweat from his forehead. The monster in the woods was terrifying, but Dudley had stood his ground. He was no longer the bully of Privet Drive. He was the shield. "It's tonight," Harry said, his voice a tense whisper. They were sitting in the corner of the crowded Gryffindor common room. Hermione had her nose buried in notes, while Ron was nervously playing with a chess piece. Dumbledore had been abruptly called away to London by an urgent ministry owl. The pieces were moving. The trap was set. "Snape is going for the stone tonight," Harry insisted. "We have to stop him." "We aren't going alone," Dudley said, standing up. His massive frame immediately drew the attention of the surrounding students, but he ignored them. "If we wait for the teachers, the stone will be gone. We go through the trapdoor. Tonight." At midnight, the quartet slipped through the castle corridors under Harry's invisibility cloak, a tight, claustrophobic fit with Dudley's broad shoulders. They reached the third-floor corridor and unlocked the door. Inside, the monstrous three-headed dog, Fluffy, was already groaning. A golden harp sat in the corner, enchanting itself to play a soft, sleepy melody. The trapdoor was wide open. "Someone's already down there," Ron whispered. "I'll go first," Harry said, but Dudley grabbed his shoulder, pulling him back. "No way," Dudley muttered. "I'm bigger. If there's something waiting at the bottom to smash us, let it try to smash me first." Without waiting for an argument, Dudley stepped over the edge and dropped into the black void. He fell for several terrifying seconds before landing with a heavy, wet thud on something soft and spongy. "It's okay," Dudley called up, his voice muffled. "Soft landing. Jump." One by one, Harry, Ron, and Hermione dropped down beside him. But the moment they settled, the floor began to move. Long, dark green tendrils like giant vipers began to wrap around Dudley's ankles, pulling him down. "Devil's snare," Hermione shrieked, struggling violently as the plant coiled around her waist. "It likes the dark and the damp." Harry and Ron thrashed wildly, which only caused the plant to bind them tighter, constricting their chests. Dudley felt a tentacle tighten around his neck, cutting off his air. Panic flared, but then he remembered his mother's frantic advice during their motel stay. "When everything is chaotic, Dudley, you stop. You look. You think. Stop moving." Dudley choked out, forcing his muscles to go completely limp. "Harry."
"Ron."
"Stop fighting it. It feeds on the struggle." Dudley relaxed his body entirely. To his amazement, the tendrils began to unravel, loosening their grip. He slipped right through the dense foliage, dropping onto the cold stone floor beneath the plant. Hermione followed a second later, having remembered that the plant hated sunlight. She conjured a bright, brilliant burst of bluebell flames from her wand. The devil's snare shrieked, withered away from the light, and dropped Harry and Ron to the floor. Harry scrambled up, coughing and gasping for air. He looked at Dudley, who was calmly brushing dirt off his maroon sweater. "How did you know to do that?" Ron wheezed. "Muggle logic," Dudley said with a faint smirk. "Sometimes, the harder you fight, the deeper you sink. You gotta know when to let go." They bypassed the chamber of the winged keys with Harry's spectacular flying and Dudley using his massive frame to physically block a swarm of rogue, diving keys that tried to pierce Harry's ribs. But the next chamber stopped them dead in their tracks. The room was vast, illuminated by the ghostly glow of a massive, marble wizard's chessboard. The opposing pieces stood towering over them, carved from black stone, their faces blank and menacing. "We have to play our way across," Ron said, his eyes scanning the board with a sharp, tactical intensity. "Harry, you take the place of the bishop. Hermione, you're the castle. Dudley, you take the place of the other knight. I'll be the knight next to you." The game was a brutal, deafening affair. Every time a piece was taken, the stone figures smashed each other into dust with terrifying violence. Ron commanded the board like a seasoned general, but the black pieces were relentless. Dudley stood on his square, his heart hammering against his ribs. He watched as a black knight pulverized a white pawn just a few feet away, showering his legs with sharp stone shrapnel. "Ron, it's a trap," Harry called out, his eyes locked on the Black Queen. "I know," Ron shouted back, his face pale and sweating. "I have to let myself be taken. It's the only way to clear the path for Harry to checkmate the king." "No," Dudley bellowed. He looked at the layout of the board. He wasn't a master strategist like Ron, but he knew physical angles. He knew momentum. "Ron, if the queen takes you, she has a clear line to smash Harry on the next turn anyway. The pieces don't move like real people. They move in straight lines." Before Ron could countermand the order, Dudley moved off his designated square, stepping directly into the path of the oncoming Black Queen. "Dudley, no. That's against the rules." Hermione screamed. The giant stone queen turned her faceless head toward Dudley. She raised a massive stone sword and swung it with a deafening screech. Dudley didn't try to use a spell, He braced his arms, diving forward to absorb the impact with his shoulder. The stone sword smashed into Dudley's side, the sheer force throwing his heavy body across the marble floor. He hit the stone wall with a sickening thud, a jagged gash tearing through his sweater, blood seeping through the fabric. But his illegal move had distracted the AI of the board. The Black King, confused by the disruption, stepped into a vulnerable position. "Harry, finish it," Dudley groaned from the floor, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Harry, fueled by a sudden, protective fury, sprinted across the squares. "Checkmate," he roared, slamming his wand against the Black King's crown. The king dropped his sword, shattering into a million pieces. The remaining black pieces bowed and slid away, clearing the door. Hermione rushed to Dudley's side, already uttering a basic healing charm she had read about. The bleeding slowed, but Dudley was pale, panting through his teeth. "Go," Dudley muttered, pushing Harry toward the next door. "I'm fine. Go with him, Hermione." They entered the next room, the potions riddle. Snape's purple and black fire blocked both exits. Hermione quickly solved the logic puzzle on the parchment, but her face fell as she inspected the bottles. "There's only enough for one," Hermione whispered, her voice trembling. "One sip to go forward, one to go back." Dudley limped into the room, leaning heavily on Ron, who had rushed over to help him. Dudley looked at the tiny vial of potion that led forward. He looked at Harry. "You're going," Dudley said to Harry. "But you aren't going alone." "Dudley, there's not enough potion," Harry started. Dudley grabbed his English oak wand. He closed his eyes, channeling every ounce of the raw, stubborn magic that had awakened inside him. He didn't know the incantation, but he knew the intent. He tapped the small vial. "Engorgo," he whispered, a spell he had seen Hermione practice once. The vial shuddered. The silver liquid inside bubbled, expanding until the bottle was completely full, doubling the dosage. Hermione's mouth fell open. That shouldn't work on complex magical drafts. The molecular stability. "I told you," Dudley said, taking the bottle and splitting the liquid into 2 cups. "Muggle logic. If you need more soup, you add water."
"Drink up, Harry."
"We have a Dark Lord to beat." The final chamber was circular, dominated by the mirror of Erised standing in the center. But the man waiting for them wasn't Severus Snape. It was Professor Quirrell. "You," Harry breathed, stepping into the room with Dudley at his side. Quirrell turned, his usual nervous twitch completely gone. A cold, arrogant smile played on his lips. "Yes, me," he drawled. "I wondered if you two would make it." Severus was so terribly predictable, playing the suspicious villain while I quietly arranged for my master's return. "Snape was trying to save me during the Quidditch match," Harry realized aloud. "Of course he was," Quirrell mocked. "He knew what I was doing. But tonight it ends." He turned to the mirror, his face twisting in frustration. "How does this wretched mirror work? I see myself presenting the stone to my master, but how do I get it out?" A cold, raspy voice seemed to emerge from Quirrell's very body, echoing off the stone walls. "Use the boys, use the boys." Quirrell snapped his fingers. Thick, invisible ropes wrapped around Harry and Dudley, dragging them forward until they stood directly in front of the golden frame. "Tell me what you see," Quirrell hissed, leveling his wand at Harry's chest. Harry looked into the glass. He saw his reflection turn pale, reach into its pocket, and pull out a blood-red stone, before dropping it back in. Harry felt a sudden, heavy weight drop into his real jacket pocket. He kept his face completely blank. I see myself shaking hands with Dumbledore," Harry lied. "He lies," the raspy voice snarled. "Let me speak to them, face to face." Quirrell hesitated. "Master, you are not strong enough." "I have strength enough for this." Quirrell reached up and began to unwrap his purple turban. The cloth fell away, and Quirrell turned his back to the boys. Harry and Dudley choked back a gasp of pure horror. Where the back of Quirrell's head should have been, there was a face, a hideous, chalk-white face with glowing red eyes and slits for nostrils, like a snake. Voldemort. The red eyes locked onto Harry, then shifted with a sickening curiosity toward Dudley. "Harry Potter," the face whispered, its breath smelling of death. "We meet again." And Dudley Dursley the anomaly, the boy whose father tried to beat the magic out of his own blood. Dudley tensed against the ropes, his jaw clenched so hard his teeth clicked. "Join me, Dudley Dursley," Voldemort hissed, his voice standardizing into a manipulative purr. "Why waste your loyalty on the Potter boy? He is famous, he is celebrated, while you will always be the clumsy cousin who started late. I know what Vernon did to you. I know the anger that burns in your chest. Join me, and I will give you the power to crush men like your father. I will make you a king in both worlds." Harry looked at Dudley, terror seizing his chest. He remembered Dudley's years of greed, his desire for dominance. Dudley stood in the grip of the invisible ropes, staring at the Dark Lord. Then, slowly, a deep, booming laugh bubbled up from his chest. It wasn't a nervous laugh, it was the defiant, mocking roar of a boy who had finally found his soul. "You think you're smart, don't you?" Dudley spat, his blue eyes flashing with unadulterated contempt. "My dad was a bully. He used his size and his money to make everyone around him feel small. I used to be just like him. I know exactly what a pathetic, cowardly bully looks like. And you? You're just a parasite hiding under a stuttering man's hat. You're nothing." Voldemort's face contorted into a mask of demonic rage. "Kill them," he shrieked. "Kill them both." The invisible ropes snapped. Quirrell spun around, lunging at Harry's throat. Harry threw his hands up, catching Quirrell by the wrists. A horrific shriek tore from Quirrell's throat as blisters and smoke erupted where Harry's skin touched his. The ancient protection left by Lily's sacrifice was burning the possessed man to ash. "Hold him, Harry," Dudley roared. Despite the searing pain in his wounded shoulder, Dudley threw his entire weight forward, tackling Quirrell from the side. He pinned the man to the stone floor, anchoring him with his sheer physical bulk. Dudley grabbed his English oak wand, slamming the tip directly against Quirrell's chest.
He didn't use a spell.
He just let his raw, unrefined magic cascade out in a violent, golden shockwave, amplifying the burning effect of Harry's touch. Quirrell's body began to crack like drying clay, white light pouring from his eyes and mouth. With a final, agonizing scream, the physical form of Quirrell crumbled into dust beneath Dudley's grip. A massive, shadowy spirit of dark smoke erupted from the ashes, screaming in fury as it tore through Harry and Dudley's chests, knocking them both into total darkness. The sterile, familiar scent of the Hogwarts hospital wing was the first thing Dudley smelled when he woke up. The afternoon sun was streaming through the high windows, illuminating the mountains of chocolate frogs and cards piled on the bedside tables. Harry was already awake in the bed next to his glasses on, talking quietly with Albus Dumbledore. Dudley," Dumbledore said softly, turning his bright blue eyes toward him. The headmaster looked ancient, but his smile was warm. "A truly remarkable performance from both of you. The stone has been destroyed, and Voldemort has been delayed once more." Dudley sat up, wincing slightly as his bandaged shoulder protested. He looked at the headmaster, but he didn't feel the awe the other students felt. He felt a cool, sharp clarity. "You knew, didn't you?" Dudley said, his voice level. Dumbledore blinked. "Know what, my dear boy?" "You knew Quirrell was infected," Dudley said, pulling his green Gryffindor blanket down. "You left the school on purpose. You used a bunch of 11-year-old kids as bait to see if Voldemort would bite." Harry looked at Dudley, then back at Dumbledore, the realization dawning on him too. Dumbledore sighed, the twinkling in his eyes fading into a heavy gravity. "Sometimes, the greater good requires." "No," Harry interrupted, his voice firm, echoing Dudley's resolve. "We are not your pawns, Professor. We protected the stone because it was the right thing to do, not because you wanted us to. We set our own boundaries now." Dumbledore stared at the two boys, recognizing the unbreakable bond of brotherhood that had formed between them, a bond that no wizarding prophecy could manipulate. "Very well," Dumbledore said quietly, bowing his head. "You have grown far beyond your years." At the leaving feast that evening, the Great Hall was decked out in green and silver for Slytherin's presumed victory. But before the feast began, Dumbledore rose to award last-minute points. To Miss Hermione Granger, for the cool use of logic, 50 points. To Mr. Ronald Weasley, for the best-played game of chess Hogwarts has seen in decades, 50 points. To Mr. Harry Potter, for pure nerve and outstanding courage, 60 points. The Gryffindor table was cheering wildly, tying with Slytherin. And finally, Dumbledore's voice boomed, to Mr. Dudley Dursley for an unyielding familial bravery that reminds us that protection is the highest form of magic, 60 points. The hall erupted. The green banners automatically shifted to brilliant scarlet and gold. Gryffindor had won the House Cup. Dudley looked across the table at Hermione and Ron, then clamped his arm around Harry's neck, laughing as the golden confetti fell from the enchanted ceiling. A week later, the Hogwarts Express pulled back into King's Cross Station. The platform was a chaotic mess of families reunited, steam, and laughter. Dudley and Harry pushed their heavy luggage carts through the barrier, stepping back into the Muggle world. Waiting for them, by the brick pillar, was Aunt Petunia. She looked thinner, her clothes simpler than the expensive outfits she used to wear in Surrey, but her face was brighter, free of the permanent scowl that had plagued her for years. She had rented a small, cozy apartment in London using the gold Harry had shared with her. "My boys," Petunia whispered, throwing her arms around both of them simultaneously. "You're safe. Thank God." "We did it, Mom," Dudley said, pulling back with a proud smile. Gryffindor won. Suddenly, the warmth of the moment was shattered by a harsh, booming voice that made Dudley's blood run cold. "Petunia!" They turned slowly. Standing near the ticket booths was Vernon Dursley. He looked terrible, his mustache was unkempt, his expensive suit was rumpled, and his face was a dark, venomous purple. He had tracked them down. "You ruined my life," Vernon snarled, stepping toward Petunia, his fists clenched. "Neighbors looking at me like I'm a freak because my wife and son ran away. You're coming home, Petunia. Both of you. I'm putting an end to this abnormal nonsense right now." A year ago, Dudley would have cowered. Harry would have braced for a blow. But today, they didn't flinch. Dudley stepped forward, his 12-year-old frame already remarkably broad, standing a full head taller than he had last summer. He placed himself directly between his father and his mother. With a slow, deliberate motion, Dudley reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his 11-inch English oak wand. He didn't point it at Vernon's face. He simply held it at his side, the polished wood gleaming in the station lights, a faint, golden spark crackling at the tip. Harry stepped up right beside him, his holly wand drawn, his green eyes flashing with an identical, dangerous resolve. Vernon froze. He looked at the wands, then up at his son's eyes. He didn't see the spoiled, pliable boy he had molded in his own image. He saw a wizard. He saw a protector. He saw a young man who looked at him with absolute, fearless pity. "Never come near my mother again," Dudley said, his voice dropping into the low, dangerous rumble that had defeated a Dark Lord. "And never speak to Harry again. The Dursley name doesn't belong to you anymore, Dad. We're breaking the cycle." Vernon's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The smug, corporate bully was utterly broken by the sheer, unyielding power of the Brotherhood standing before him. With a cowardly whimper, Vernon turned on his heel and fled into the crowded London streets, disappearing forever. Petunia let out a shaky breath, placing her hands on her son's and nephew's shoulders. Harry slipped his wand back into his pocket, looking at Dudley with a grin. "Nice wand work, Duds. Didn't even have to use a spell," Dudley smiled, turning his back on the old life. They walked out of the station together, into the bright London afternoon. The revenge against the past was complete. The cycle of abuse was dead, buried under the weight of an unbreakable vow. As they hailed a cab toward their new home, Harry and Dudley knew that whatever challenges the future held, they would face them not as rivals, but as brothers of the sword and the wand. And that's how Dudley and Harry rewrote history. Now, a quick challenge for you. If you think Wizard Dudley is a better brother to Harry than Ron Weasley ever was, comment Team Dudley. If you think Ron is irreplaceable, comment Team Ron. Defend your choice below, and subscribe so you don't miss year 2.